Hello! Hello, chat. Also, B, don't worry about being 4 minutes late. I was just looping the Starting Soon song because I forgot to go to the bathroom before stream. Yeah, whoops. Anyways, how are y'all doing today? I am going to be reading chapter 9 of The Stars and Their Children by Bones and the Bees. Ignore that I said chapter 8 on Twitter. I forgot. Also, as always, if you are new to my stream, be sure to leave a follow if you enjoyed this content, because at 150 followers, entire stream in a British accent, funny haha. And also, if you want to get notified of when I'm going to be live, because I always, I tend to let people know when I'm gonna be live, like the day of, like a couple hours beforehand. Today, it was like 30 minutes beforehand because I lost track of time. Sorry. At least I let my mods know ahead of time. But, if you want to stay updated on when I'm going to be live, be sure to follow me on Twitter at claymation with 3 N's. Alright. I say we get into this. Hold on a second. I think maybe... Okay. There we go. Wait, do I have any... No, I don't. Cool. Okay, let's do... Which do I... It's this one. There it is. Sometimes I forget, like, where my things are. Like, my scenes. Let's see. Chapter 9. A tongue can be just as sharp as a dagger. Oh, wait. Okay, it was... Okay, I didn't know if it was, like, chapter 8 or chapter 9. I was right about it being chapter 9. We're good. I keep second-guessing myself. Let's see. The summary. The boys receive a summons from a very unexpected person. So to recap the last chapter, if you weren't here for it, Wilbur can't sleep, and so he walks around the castle to clear his head, and he finds out that the other planets are having a secret meeting without Wilbur and Tommy, and they planned to do that for a while, but they didn't know that Wilbur was listening in. And basically, Emperor Filza said that he has plans, aside from Eldingvegger, like, plans for Tommy and Wilbur, and he sees potential in Wilbur. But we don't really know if that's a good thing or a bad thing yet. Let's see. Alright. Before we get started, there are a few things I want to talk about regarding this story from here on out, so don't ignore, please read this. I talked about this on my Twitter already, but for those who don't follow my Twitter, I'm going to be continuing my stories the same as I always have. I took some time to consider if I wanted to keep writing this story as planned and not alter anything, especially regarding Techno's role in it. Okay, I'm assuming this was... Yeah, it makes sense that this was written around the time of the announcement. And after talking it over with friends, I felt like it would be erasure to try and minimize his role or remove him from my stories in any way. To other authors, if that's all you feel comfortable doing, then of course do what's best for you. But for me, I feel like with the amount of time and effort Techno put into creating C Techno as a character, it would be a disservice to just stop writing about him. So I'm not altering anything. I'm going to just keep going with stars as it's been planned. Now for this chapter specifically, in a cruel twist of irony, I had planned this chapter out 2 days before that video was posted on Techno's channel. The first half of the chapter features Stars Techno more than he's been featured in the entire fic so far, and while I debated changing my plan, so this wasn't the first thing I posted right after everything, I decided to keep it because it would be a disservice to the overarching narrative to change it. Basically, I really needed the scene to happen. If it's too soon for you, I completely understand. There's my moon and stars spacer after the scene ends, so you can scroll down to that and just skip to the next part if you don't feel ready to read a technocentric scene like that. I'll provide a summary of that first half in the end author notes of this chapter. I hope you've all been taking care of yourselves. We're grieving as a community right now, and I know some of you are finding comfort in fics right now, so I hope this can provide you with either a distraction or some comfort you need. Remember to drink water and be kind to yourselves. Okay. I will drink water because my throat is already sore somehow. I think it's time to pull out the good old Listerine patch. These things are lifesavers for my reading streams. Because mint has like soothing properties. Ah, my pen. Also, if you keep hearing like something drop, that's my pen dropping onto the desk, because I have this one stim of like a skill that I learned in middle school. I can twirl like anything like a pen or a pencil in between my fingers, like perpetually, with like nonstop, until it goes out of control and falls onto the desk. Let's see. The next 2 days passed by in a blur. The morning after he eavesdropped on that meeting, Wilbur gave Tommy a rundown of what he'd learned. Again, he didn't learn anything major, but he was able to confirm that Philza wanted to bring Eldingvegr into the Empire, and that he had special plans for both Wilbur and Tommy. Tommy didn't seem as concerned about that as Wilbur was. Whether that was because he wasn't registering how unusual that was, or that he just didn't want to think about it, Wilbur wasn't sure. Either way, he didn't push it with Tommy, because it wasn't like it changed anything in the long run. What Wilbur didn't tell Tommy was how Philza had mentioned the potential he saw in Wilbur specifically. He wasn't sure why. It wasn't as if he didn't want Tommy to know that Philza was keeping a closer eye on him for some unknown reason. He just didn't mention it. There was another meeting with the leaders the following day, one that Wilbur and Tommy were actually invited to, and it wasn't any more productive than the first one had been. It was less formal than the first meeting, with a few representatives from Flosslium also being in the meeting this time. Even so, the representatives from Flosslium didn't say much, seemingly content to allow the others to guide most of the discussion. Wilbur and Tommy didn't have much to say either. It wasn't because they didn't want to speak up, but there just wasn't much to talk directly about Eldingvegr going on. For the most part, it was a meeting where the leaders discussed their agreements with the Empire regarding trade, and how it had been changed in the past few days due to the events on Eldingvegr. A conversation Wilbur didn't even think he and Tommy needed to be around for. Still, he forced himself to pay attention, just on the off chance they gained any valuable insight as to how the Empire worked. It was pointless in the end, though. After the meeting ended, Wilbur dragged Tommy back to the library and spent the rest of the day devising a list of texts for Tommy to read to continue his studies. It felt a bit like busy work, but it wasn't like there was anything else they could do. Regardless, it was frustrating that even when they were invited to participate in a meeting, there was still nothing Wilbur could do to actually change anything. It was like he and Tommy were there as just decoration. So the leaders could say, "Look, we invited the princes this time, so they're totally a part of this," just for props rather than them actually having any proper input. The following day after that, they weren't called in for another meeting. He was sure the leaders were gathered again, but Jack relayed a message to tell to them from Filza that it was going to be more Empire-specific negotiations rather than anything related directly to Eldingvegr, so there wasn't much point in them being present. Yeah, sure. Wilbur was certain it was just another excuse for them to hold a secret meeting like the one 2 nights earlier. Since they weren't going to be in attendance at the meeting, Wilbur had planned to go to the library once again for lack of any other ways to spend their time. But before they could leave their room, Jack was knocking on the door once again, delivering the message of a summons. "I'm supposed to take you two to the gym," Jack explained, arms folded over his chest. Tommy frowned. "Since when does this place have a gym?" "We've always had one." Jack shrugged. "Technically, it's the training room, but it's a fucking gym. We got, training equipment in there." "Why are we being summoned to a training room?" Wilbur questioned, furrowing his brows. "You think they tell me shit?" No. Wilbur doubted there was a lot of reason to tell a low-level guard like Jack Manifold why the 2 princes were being taken to a training room. Despite how strange the entire concept was, it wasn't like they could just say no. So, after pulling on their shoes, the 2 boys left their room, following Jack down the twisting hallways of the palace. To Wilbur's surprise, Jack led them past the dining room and into a wing of the palace they'd never been in before. It was past the throne room and the negotiations room as well, and at one point Jack even had to relay his orders to several guards so they could unlock a large set of black sliding doors. "What part of the palace is this?" Wilbur asked as the doors slid shut behind them, revealing the same unmarked walls and stone pillars that decorated most of the halls. Okay, we're doing good on bitrate, nothing's crashed, good. Sorry, I just got paranoid for a second. "This is the Emperor and Imperator's personal wing," Jack told them, straightening his shoulders just a tad at the words. Immediately, Wilbur stiffened. Why are we in their personal wing?" Jack rolled his eyes, as if Wilbur had as if Wilbur had asked an obscenely stupid question. "Because that's where the 2 of them train? Duh." Wilbur glanced at Tommy, who was giving him a wide-eyed stare. The lines of confusion were just as clear on his face as they were in Wilbur's mind, both of them practically screaming the same question in their heads. Why the fuck were they being summoned to Filza and Technoblade's personal training room? They passed by many closed doors with scanners on the front, looking as though they required either a key card or some kind of fingerprint to open. Wilbur eyed one particularly plain-looking door with an extremely heavy scanner mounted beside it. Was that an office of some kind? The Emperor's personal office? Finally, after what felt like ages of walking, Jack stopped in front of a towering set of double doors. He nodded at the single guard standing in front of it, relaying his orders and gesturing to Wilbur and Tommy. The guard narrowed her eyes, scanning over both of them, before she turned and tapped the scanner to turn it green. The doors slid open with a soft hiss. Jack gestured for them to go in, and Wilbur knew he was probably going to be stuck waiting outside until they were done. Wait, 1 second. I need to clean my glasses. I noticed like one little speck and I need to like do a thorough deep clean. Why won't it come off? Anyway. Resting a hand on Tommy's shoulder, Wilbur shared one last look with Jack before the two of them hurried through. The training room was much grander than Wilbur expected it to be. High-arched ceilings dominated the space, with sharp angles and sleek surfaces reminding Wilbur of the throne room. A massive floor-to-ceiling window dominated an entire wall, overlooking the city from a side Wilbur hadn't seen before, showing off more of that glittering horizon. In the room itself, Wilbur noticed a few black mats had been spread across the floor, and there was a long table covered in various weaponry. Some of the weapons were basic, small daggers and longer spears decorated with ornate gems and sharpened to a deadly point. But there were much more complex weapons as well, like curved swords and a few hollow discs that Wilbur recognized as ones that manifested force field shields. As soon as he spotted the weapons, Tommy gasped in delight, running over before Wilbur could even try to stop him. He picked up a thin, short dagger made of a glimmering black metal. The handle was silver, and twisted into intricate swirls to create a rather gorgeous hilt inlaid with blue jewels. Tommy was grinning from ear to ear as he carefully ran his fingers over the edge of the blade, but nearly dropped it when a booming voice called out, "Don't cut your finger off with that!" Whirling around, Wilbur stiffened when he saw Technoblade standing at the other end of the room. Having shed the long coat he usually wore in favor of just wearing trousers and a tunic. His hair was tied back in a high ponytail today, but Wilbur could still see the deftly woven braids still tied into it as well. He was watching them both with a bored gaze, one eyebrow raised as if he was just waiting for Tommy to break something. "So you're the one who summoned us," Wilbur said, taking the dagger out of Tommy's hands and setting it back on the table. Tommy frowned at him, but didn't try to pick it up again as he turned his own focus onto Technoblade as well. "I did," Technoblade confirmed, taking a few steps forward so he was in the center of the room. "Aren't you supposed to be in that meeting with the Emperor?" Tommy asked, folding his arms over his chest. Technoblade shook his head, walking forward more until he was right in front of the both of them. "Nah, I wanted a break from it for a bit, and I wasn't super instrumental to what we're talking about today, so I left early," he explained, golden eyes darting between them both. "Usually when I don't have anything else to do, I spend my time training. Then I realized you two are probably bored out of your minds with nothing to do. And I need sparring partners that aren't guards, since Puffy keeps yelling at me when I take her guards off duty to train with them. So I figured you both would do." Drink break, my throat is getting dry. Wilbur's eyes widened. You want us to spar with you?" "Yeah? Is that a problem?" Technoblade asked. Excuse me." Tommy spoke before Wilbur could. "No, that's not a problem at all," he exclaimed, practically bouncing on his toes. "Sparring sounds great. A-okay with us, no problem here. What was Tommy doing? I think it's a bit of a problem considering neither of us know how to fight, Wilbur hissed, elbowing Tommy in the side. At this, Technoblade blinked, clearly surprised. You don't know how to fight? Tommy scoffed. Maybe not formally, but I'm not fucking useless. Could knock anyone out with my fists if I wanted. When have you ever knocked someone out with a punch? Wilbur questioned, turning to frown at Tommy. Wait, when have you ever even punched someone before? I've punched Tubbo, Tommy declared proudly. That was literally an accident because you were trying to fake punch him as a joke and had shit aim. Wilbur reminded him. You didn't knock him out cold either. I don't even think he bruised. He definitely had a bruise, Tommy argued. He did not. You fucking liar! I'm not lying. You're the one who... I'm already regretting my choices, Technoblade deadpanned, cutting off their bickering. Wilbur flushed, having momentarily forgotten they were in the room with the imperator of an entire empire. The man who very well could be their only chance at getting Eldingvegr back, considering he was the one in charge of the Empire's military. My apologies, Your Imperial Highness. My brother and I got distracted. Wilbur apologized, eyes falling to the ground in faux deference. But to answer your question, no, we haven't had any formal training with fighting. Technoblade's pink brows scrunched together at this. What are they even teaching you to anyway if you don't know how to fight? What if someone tries to assassinate one of you? That's what I'm saying! Tommy exclaimed. I had to go and study fucking maths instead of learning how to, defend myself. Given the number of guards we had in the palace, I don't think they ever thought it was really necessary, Wilbur explained. It was mostly the truth. There were plenty of guards in the palace on Eldingvegr, so there wasn't much of a safety concern. But one of the main reasons no one was ever that worried about there being any attempts on Tommy's life in the palace was because they always had Nikki with them. Nikki, who could control someone like a puppet just with a few words. Although Nikki's purpose as emissary was to keep tabs on both him and Tommy on behalf of the Sirens, there was also always the unsaid role she played as their unofficial bodyguard. Technoblade didn't need to know that part though. Well, you're not an Eldingvegr anymore, so I think it's time we changed that. It'd really suck after all if our negotiations got ruined because some random assassin broke in, Technoblade suddenly said, gesturing for the two of them to move away from the weapons table. Frowning, Wilbur and Tommy both stepped to the side and watched as Technoblade picked up the dagger Tommy had been admiring. Is that a risk here? Wilbur asked, struggling to keep his voice level. I thought you said we were safe. You are, but it never hurts to be prepared, Technoblade said, meeting his eyes in a flat stare. He set the dagger back down on the table and picked up a small hollow disc beside it. When he tapped the top of it, his body was momentarily lit up in a shimmering blue light, before fading just as fast. Are you too familiar with training shields? Technoblade asked. Oh yeah, we've used them a few times, Tommy answered, already reaching for one on the table. He held it towards Technoblade with one eyebrow raised. He wants us both to turn them on? Yeah, do that. Tommy didn't need to be told twice, and was immediately encased in that blue light for a brief moment before it faded to invisibility. Then, Technoblade and Tommy's eyes both fell on Wilbur, who still hadn't made a move towards the table. Prince Orpheus? Technoblade pushed, walking onto the mat and starting to stretch. Your offer is appreciated, but we don't need training, Wilbur said quickly, wrapping his arms around himself. Will, come on, Tommy whined, slumping into his side. What's wrong? Why don't you want to learn some fighting moves? It wasn't that Wilbur's problem was with learning how to fight. Well, it partially was because the idea of physically hurting someone made him sick to his stomach, but it wasn't his primary objection. It was more to do with who was offering to teach them. Sorry, sudden yawn. The Imperator of the Antarctic Empire. A man they were supposed to be on guard any time they were around. Someone who was watching them, waiting to notice any weak spots. If they agreed to train with Technoblade, they were making themselves vulnerable in front of him, admitting ignorance. Wilbur didn't want to stoop down so low in front of someone they were in the middle of political negotiations with, and he couldn't believe how cavalier Tommy was being about the entire thing. Do you really want to show him how helpless we are right to his face? Wilbur hissed into Tommy's ear, leaning down so Technoblade wouldn't be able to overhear. Tommy scoffed. Will, even if we were trained, I'm pretty sure he could still kick our asses without even breaking a sweat. Look at him! I'm not trying to say we need to make him think we could fight him, because that's obviously not true. But we're admitting our weakness. Don't you get it? Wasn't that what we wanted, though? We want to get sympathy and shit. Tommy questioned. Sorry. Wilbur sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. We're trying to get sympathy from the Badlands, not from the fucking Imperator. Tommy rolled his eyes. But I don't care. He already knows we can't fight, so I don't get what the fuss is about. I'm gonna try and learn something fucking useful, but if you want to pout on the sidelines, be my guest. Then, before Wilbur could argue, Tommy was grabbing the dagger off the table and hurrying towards the mat. Wilbur watched him go, clenching his jaw as he debated the merits of just dragging his little brother away, but knew it was just going to cause more trouble than it was worth. So after a few seconds of silence, he grabbed a hollow disc and turned on his own shield as well. Then, he moved closer to the table, searching for a weapon of his own to use. His eyes quickly caught on a dagger that looked as though it was made of shimmering white gemstone. The blade itself was curved and almost iridescent, rainbows catching in the dull lights above his head. The hilt was gold and had intricate swirls and leaves carved into it, and when Wilbur picked it up, he noticed it was heavy, but not too heavy in his hands. Once you've picked your weapon, come over here and I'll start going through the basics, Technoblade called out. Biting back a sharp retort, Wilbur curled his fingers around the hilt of the dagger, and Tommy followed Tommy to the mat. Another reason he didn't want to train with Technoblade, besides what he'd already told Tommy, was that he didn't understand Technoblade's motivations for this. Why would he care that the two of them didn't know how to fight? It's not like he actually cared for their safety. If they got killed by some random assassin, it would probably be better for the Antarctic Empire in the long run, because they could just take over Elningbeger without any worry about negotiations from that point forward. Why am I yawning all of a sudden so much? Jesus Christ! Wilbur didn't understand why Technoblade was doing this. And if he couldn't figure out someone's motivations, that was usually a red flag. Wilbur didn't trust Technoblade, just like he didn't trust Vilza. But Tommy was completely oblivious to any ulterior motivations the Imperator could have, and it bothered Wilbur to see his little brother act so clueless. Tommy wasn't stupid. Wilbur knew he wasn't. And yet he was acting like this. It was driving him a bit mad, to say the least. Training began with Technoblade running through stances with them. He had conjured up some sleek dagger from his pocket, and was using it to act as a mirror for how Wilbur and Tommy should hold their own blades. Once they got their feet positions down, Technoblade began to demonstrate different lunges and swipes, and that was where Wilbur began to get frustrated. Tommy was a natural at this. It was the only way Wilbur could explain how he looked so fluid, darting forward and back, blade curved in his hand like it was an extension of his own arm. He mimicked Technoblade like a mirror, a wide grin splitting his face the entire time he practiced. Wilbur was decidedly not on the same level. His movements were stiff and clunky. The blade felt unnatural in his hand, and he kept struggling not to drop it whenever he tried a lunge. Wilbur wasn't made for fighting. His weapons were his words, not his body. He could spend all day dancing in political conversations, but his mastery of the choreography ended the second he was handed a physical weapon. Not even a full hour had passed before sweat was building up under Wilbur's coat. Tommy had tossed his overcoat to the side long ago, and was still mirroring Technoblade in plain trousers and a shirt, looking far too close to matching with the Imperator for Wilbur's liking. Thankfully, before Wilbur could really start to go mad with the monotony of every parry and lunge, a new voice cut in. "Hey, Techno..." "Oh." Glancing behind him, Wilbur saw the doors to the training room open, and a familiar Endirian made his way inside. Rombu faltered when he noticed Tommy and Wilbur in the room, his split-colored eyes blinking quickly as he glanced between the brothers and Technoblade. Sorry, is this a bad time?" Rombu stammered, wringing his hands in front of him. "It's just, this is when we usually train, so I figured, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting, but..." "You're fine, Rombu," Technoblade reassured him, straightening up from where he was demonstrating a stabbing blow on a training dummy. "I was just giving the princes a basic rundown in self-defense." Rombu nodded, taking a step backwards. "Oh, yeah, okay. Sorry, I'll be on my way then. I don't want to bother you guys." "Nah, you're staying," Technoblade said, waving him closer. "I need your help, actually. I'll spar with Prince Theseus, and you can spar with Prince Orpheus." At this, Wilbur stiffened, nearly dropping his dagger onto the ground. Why don't I spar with you, and Theseus can spar with Rombu?" Wilbur suggested. Technoblade raised an eyebrow. "No offense, but if you want to save yourself from total embarrassment, stick with Rombu." Heat rushed to Wilbur's cheeks. "Theseus has the same training I do," he argued. "It's more evenly matched this way anyway. Rombu's closer to Theseus's age." "Will, it's fine. Tommy, let me handle this," Wilbur snapped, shooting a glare at Tommy. Clenching his jaw, Tommy narrowed his eyes, but didn't say anything as silence fell over the training room. The weight of Technoblade's stare was heavy on Wilbur's shoulders, and he struggled not to squirm as the seconds ticked by. Then, "You don't trust me to hold a knife to your younger brother's throat," Technoblade said, no hint of any emotion whatsoever in his voice. Fighting to keep his face neutral, Wilbur lifted his chin and met the piglin's golden eyes. "No, I don't," Even though they were wearing training shields, they could only do so much. They were mostly for training after all, and with one really strong hit, they could break apart and be rendered completely useless. All it would take was one good swing from Technoblade, and Tommy could be dead. Suddenly, things moved very fast. 1 second, Technoblade was standing across the mat, closer to Tommy than he was to Wilbur. Then in the next, Wilbur's head was slamming into the mat, and there was pressure on his chest as Technoblade was kneeling above him. From the corner of his eye, he could see the training shield flickering around his body. Pain radiated through his skull, and his lungs fought to breathe with the pressure being put on them from the hand Technoblade was using to pin him down. There was something cold against his throat. The flickering blue light got more noticeable as Technoblade held the blade only inches from his skin. If I wanted to kill either of you, you'd already be dead, Technoblade told him. Hi, Morrow. I took a look to my left to read chat at a very inopportune time. for like in terms of the reading, because things got from 0 to 100 real quick. It sounds lovely. I'll try and give a rundown. I don't know if you've ever read The Stars and Their Children, but, basically, Wilbur and Tommy are princes that escaped from their planet that was taken over by the Asempi Empire because they were going to get assassinated by Dream, who is the emperor of the Asempi Empire. Excuse me. They've taken refuge on the planet Zephys 4, also known as the Antarctic Empire, where Emperor Philza and Imperator Technoblade reign. And right now, Technoblade is teaching Tommy and Wilbur how to spar. Hold on 1 second. I need to change something real quick. Notification settings. There we go. I was getting like Discord notifications and I was just like, I'm gonna mute that channel real quick. Where was I? Oh yeah, here. Okay, what was? Holiday 29. Oh, I should probably add Peepo-G. I don't read much either. The most reading I've done was for these reading streams. I used to read a lot though. Okay, let's see. Let's start from here. If I wanted to kill either of you, you'd already be dead, Technoblade told him, his voice scarily calm. Wilbur's heart pounded in his ears as he met those bright gold eyes, and knew full well that Technoblade was telling the truth. After a few beats of silence, Technoblade let go. He got back to his feet and offered Wilbur a hand up. Before he could even register the hand, though, Tommy was shoving past Technoblade, falling to his knees beside Wilbur and scrambling to put himself in between him and the Imperator. "Don't you dare lay a hand on my brother like that again," Tommy snarled. It was then Wilbur realized Tommy was trying to shield him from Technoblade with his own body. Technoblade didn't seem bothered by this aggression. "I was just trying to make a point." "Yeah, well, point made. Now step the fuck back, Tommy ordered, glaring at Technoblade with a kind of wrath flashing in his eyes that Wilbur hadn't seen before. Although there was no way Technoblade was intimidated by Tommy, he did as he asked, gesturing for Rambu to come join them on the mat. Rambu seemed like he had no idea what he was doing there, and awkwardly shuffled over while Tommy helped pull Wilbur to his feet. "Are you okay?" Tommy whispered to him, squeezing Wilbur's hand. "I'm fine," Wilbur reassured him, his pounding heart already fading back to a normal level. Just startled. "So, can we continue training now?" Technoblade asked, drawing Tommy and Wilbur's attention back to him. "You're not hurt, right, Prince Orpheus?" Wilbur shook his head. "I'm alright." Technoblade nodded. "If you want to stop, we can. I'm not trying to force you two to be here, but I do think you both need to learn how to defend yourselves at some point. On the one hand, Wilbur didn't want to be here, especially after that. It wasn't necessarily the fact that Technoblade had threatened his life, because he really hadn't. It was more so that Wilbur was humiliated, having been reminded yet again how powerless he and Tommy truly were in this entire situation. But as much as he hated to admit it, Technoblade had a point. They weren't on Eldingvegr anymore, and it wouldn't hurt for them to learn how to defend themselves, especially considering how well Tommy seemed to take to it. "We'll stay," Wilbur decided, bending down to pick up his dagger from where he'd dropped it. "If that's all right with Theseus, of course." Tommy seemed surprised, but after a beat, nodded as well. "Yeah, we'll keep going. And you can spar with him." Wilbur relented, shoving down the hot shame rising up in his throat. "I'll spar with Rambu." It wasn't admitting defeat, Wilbur told himself. He was proving to Technoblade that he wasn't afraid of him by letting him spar with Tommy. Yeah, that's what it was. He wasn't afraid of Technoblade, and wanted to make sure he knew that. "Sounds good to me." Technoblade shrugged, readjusting the grip on his own dagger. "Rambu, go get yourself a weapon and a training shield. Show him the first style I taught you." Nodding, Rambu hurried over to the table, picking out a dark red dagger with a crystalline blade. Crystalline? I don't know. Taking a breath to steady himself, Wilbur moved to a separate mat, watching from the corner of his eye as Technoblade and Tommy began to circle one another. The tension from Wilbur and Technoblade's altercation faded quickly as they all became distracted by fighting. To Wilbur's surprise, Tommy held up well against Technoblade, at least as well as he could, considering Tommy had zero training and Technoblade had years and years of it. As for his own progress against Rambu, it was more than generous to say he was lacking. While Rambu didn't seem like much of a fighter, he was far better off than Wilbur, and he ended up flat on his back at least 5 times over the course of their sparring session. At least Rambu was nice about it. He apologized every time he hit Wilbur, and always helped him to his feet. He showed Wilbur how to shift his weight with every attack or dodge, and advised him on the best ways to use his lanky build to his advantage, rather than relying on brute strength he didn't have. Near the end of the session, though, while Wilbur was trying to figure out how to parry against Rambu's lunge, he was startled by an unexpected sound. He stumbled over his own 2 feet, nearly falling right into Rambu's dagger. but didn't bother acknowledging his mistake as he whipped his head over to the mat Tommy and Technoblade were sparring on. Tommy was laughing. It was bright, loud laughter. The kind that had been a rarity since they'd escaped Eldingvegger. Somehow, he and Technoblade had ended up on the floor, and Tommy was clutching his stomach as he cackled at the ceiling. Technoblade was laughing quietly as well, and Wilbur was taken back by the small smile that had quirked the corners of the Imperator's lips. Then, as if realizing what he was doing, Tommy cut himself off all at once. He snapped his mouth shut, eyes darting nervously over to meet Wilbur's. They shared a silent look, before Tommy turned away from him, pushing to his feet and shaking himself off. They went back to sparring without anyone saying a word about what just happened. But Wilbur couldn't ignore the rock that dropped into his gut at that. For the rest of the session, Wilbur's fighting was even worse than it had been before. At the very least, though, Rambo didn't comment on it, and for that, Wilbur was grateful. I need more water. Actually, I'll just take another Listerine patch. My throat gets sore really easily doing these streams. Not on the streams where I actually scream at people a bunch for losing in a Skywars game, but these. One second. Okay, there we go. Late that night, Wilbur found he couldn't sleep again. Rambo had walked with them to the dining room after their training session had ended, and they all ate dinner with Amesy, chatting about mindless things for the sake of not eating in silence. It was both awkward and not, with the physical exhaustion weighing down both his and Tommy's bones, making it impossible for tension to line their shoulders. But something off still settling in the air between them. Amesy could tell something was amiss, but didn't ask questions. Wilbur had a feeling Rambo would tell them later, and he was glad for that, because he really didn't want to try and explain what was wrong. Because technically, nothing should have been wrong, except for the fact that what had happened was weird. It was weird for the Imperator to offer to train them. It was weird for him to care about their safety. And it was weird for Tommy to laugh with him as if they were old friends. It was weird, but it had happened. Now Wilbur was left to try and make sense of it all. After dinner, Tommy called the shower first, and passed out almost as soon as his wet hair hit the pillow. Wilbur was glad for that, because he didn't have the energy to try and talk with Tommy about the strangeness of it all right then. So instead, he took his time with his own shower, letting the hot water soothe the aches in his muscles and the bruises littering his back and chest. Despite the fact that his entire body felt as though it were made of jelly, by the time Wilbur was settled into bed next to Tommy, he found himself wide awake once more. The exhaustion that had been tugging at his eyes was gone, and anxiety was buzzing under his skin like an unwelcome friend. This time, Wilbur didn't bother laying there for half an hour staring at the ceiling. Instead, he accepted his fate with surprising grace and considered his options for a few moments before climbing out of the bed once more. He wasn't as nervous leaving Tommy alone in their room this time like he'd been before. Of course, it still felt wrong not to have his little brother at his side, but he was able to shove the anxiety down. Because it was like Technoblade had said earlier that day. If he wanted either him or Tommy dead, they'd already be dead. Wilbur was sure the same thing applied to Philza. His thick socks muffled his steps across the cool stone floor as he hurried to the library. It was dark in the palace at this time of night, with long shadows dancing along the walls and tricking Wilbur every few minutes into thinking there was something in the corner of his eye when there wasn't. The library itself also had all the lights turned off, but the faint light pouring in from the window outside was enough for Wilbur to walk by, and he made his way to one of the desks in the corner of the room, wincing at the brightness of the first hollow pad he picked up. Pulling his knees up to his chest, Wilbur slumped against the cushions of the chair as he rested the hollow pad against his thighs. Hold on, I forgot that there's a part in this video where there's just, like, no music. It might have been, like, copyrighted or something, which is funny, because this is called No Copyright Lo-Fi. One second. There we go. He scrolled through the text on the hollow pad itself, blinking slowly until he spotted a title that piqued his interest. It was a book on the native species of the Nether, the planet where piglins like Technoblade originated from. Wilbur didn't know much about piglins outside of that, so he figured it wasn't a bad subject to look into, especially if this whole training thing with Technoblade ended up becoming a regular fixture in their routine here. Wilbur started to read. The library was quiet around him, wrapping him up in silent reassurances as the anxiety twisting inside of him began to smooth itself out. He read about a land of brimstone and hellfire, where the natives had adapted to live with intense heat and toxic fumes, clinging on to the few valuables they could find, like gold and trees the color of blood. He hadn't even gotten 5 pages in, though, when he heard the door to the library opened. Oh. I didn't realize anyone would be in here this time of night. Fuck. Shit. Of fucking course, of all people to find him here, it was none other than Emperor Philza himself. Wilbur's luck really was shit, now wasn't it? My apologies, I couldn't sleep, so I was just reading. You don't need to apologize. The library is free for anyone to use, Wilbur reassured him, lifting a hand to stop Wilbur from standing. Due to the late hour, Philza wasn't wearing the refinery that Wilbur was used to seeing him in. Instead, he simply wore a long robe with slits cut into the back for his wings, and the circlet that usually rested on his head was gone. Even still, Wilbur could see the faint light glinting off his talons, and couldn't help but compare his pitch-black wings to an endless void. It was difficult to make out any individual feathers in the gloom like this, and Wilbur disliked how it made Philza look even more intimidating than usual. Do you mind if I ask what you're reading? Philza asked, making his way across the room and towards Wilbur's chair. Wilbur felt the urge to shrink back in his seat. I was reading up on the species of the Nether. Philza hummed, stopping when he was right next to Wilbur, but not settling in the seat beside him. The piglins, yes. I'd imagine you want to learn a bit more about them after your training session with Techno today. You know about that? Wilbur asked without thinking, before mentally smacking himself in the head for the stupid question. Of course he knew. There was no reason for Technoblade not to tell Philza about it. Apparently, Philza thought it was a stupid question too, and his mocking laughter sent heat to Wilbur's cheeks. Yes, he told me all about it. Mentioned how Prince Theseus was a natural knack for fighting, while you do not. Do not. Wilbur finished for him, setting the hollow pad down on the desk. Yes, I'm aware. Are you embarrassed by this? Philza asked, leaning against the side of the desk. His wings brushed Wilbur's shoulder, and he had to suppress the urge to flinch in surprise. No, I've never been inclined to that sort of thing anyway, Wilbur said, keeping his eyes straight ahead. Philza hummed, and his feathers ruffled with the sound. I didn't think so. You prefer fights with words to actual physical encounters, isn't that right? Wilbur clenched his jaw. I suppose you could say that. A bead of silence hung heavily in the air between them. Wilbur's own breathing echoed in his ears, his heart slamming against his ribcage as he tried to think of how to extricate himself from the situation. He wasn't awake enough to play these mind games with Philza. Not right now. Not when he was so off his game from the events of that day. That makes sense, I suppose, Philza said thoughtfully, though I must admit, it's a bit of a shame. Wilbur frowned. What's a shame? Looking down at him then, Philza smiled. And it was that same razor-sharp smile that turned Wilbur's blood to ice. It's a shame that the sirens don't teach their sons how to use their voice. Seems like we'd be rather good at that. And suddenly, Wilbur's heart dropped into his stomach as the realization hit him. The library lights were off. They were off, and the entire room was cast in shadows. Despite the light pouring in from the window, it was faint. That meant in that moment, Wilbur was cast in a gloom dark enough for the freckles on his face to be glowing bright blue. Philza was standing right in front of him, and now that he was actually paying attention, Wilbur could clearly see the light from his own freckles casting a faint glow over Philza's face. Now it makes sense why you got so nervous when I brought up Themis before, Philza said, cutting Wilbur off. He reached out with his clawed hand, gently grabbing Wilbur's chin and tilting his face up towards him. Wilbur was struggling to keep his breathing even as Philza's eyes roamed over his glowing cheeks, knowing full well that only one species in the entire known universe had fluorescent freckles like that. You know, I thought you might not fully be human. Your ears are just barely pointed, and your teeth are just a tad too sharp. But I figured those might just be traits you inherited from your father you don't share with Prince Theseus. That's not the case, though, is it? Wilbur swallowed down the lump in his throat, knowing there was no use in keeping up the lie now. No. Our mother was a siren, so we are both half siren and half human, he admitted softly. And that's why Eldingvega has a close relationship with Venus, Philza muttered, still holding on to his chin. If I'm getting this right, Prince Theseus was the product of an arranged marriage between your mother and the King of Eldingvega? Yes, that's correct. And you were a child she had before her arranged marriage had been put into place, Philza pushed, raising an eyebrow. Or did she have an affair after she was already married to the king? Wilbur grit his teeth. The first one, he forced out. My mother would have never jeopardized the alliance like that. With that, he ripped his face out of Philza's grip and scowled when Philza let his hand drop without a fight. Did you ever meet your father? Philza then asked, folding his hands in front of him.
No, Wilbur confessed, eyes dropping to his lap. All she ever told me was that he was some human she spent a night with on an outer sector planet when she was trying to run away from her royal duties. Her mother found her though, and it wasn't until she was back on Themis that she found out she was pregnant. Do you ever wish you could have met him? Now that made Wilbur pause. He stared at his hands in his lap, twisting his fingers together as he tried to think if he ever had any desire to meet his father. Because he knew the answer, but it felt like it wasn't the thing you were supposed to say. Still, it was the truth, and he had no reason to lie about this to Philza. No, I had my mother, and later I had Tommy. Philza hummed at this. And yet you don't mention Prince Theseus's father. Is there a reason for that? He could argue that you just forgot to mention him.
Dad, is that you? I don't think Philza is... I was thinking the same thing as you, but I don't think that he's... Philza is an Elytrian, not a human. Oh, I just wanted to make a dad joke. Oh, okay. That's fair.
Let's see. He should argue that he just forgot to mention him. Philza didn't need to know about Wilbur's relationship with the King of Eldingvegor, about his cold looks or the cruel ways he dismissed Wilbur, as if he wanted to forget his existence entirely. But Wilbur couldn't bring himself to try and defend the man, to pretend like he meant anything to Wilbur when he'd made it more than obvious that Wilbur was little more than a bug underneath his shoe to them. So instead, Wilbur just stayed quiet. Philza understood his silence loud and clear. He wasn't fond of the fact that his wife came with baggage. Is that it? Wilbur winced at the question, and suddenly, there was a clawed hand resting on his shoulder. Does that bother you, Orpheus? Philza whispered, crouching down so he was no longer standing over Wilbur as he sat, being referred to as baggage. Once again, Wilbur noticed that he didn't use his title. Fine. Two could play at that game. What do you think, Philza? Wilbur asked, narrowing his eyes and emphasizing his name, despite how strange it felt on his tongue. Would you enjoy being referred to as baggage? To his frustration, Philza chuckled at this and squeezed his shoulder. I've been called far worse than that, mate. But yes, I suppose it would bother me if I was your age. Where is my dad? Your age. Another dig at his immaturity. Philza couldn't help but try to drive a knife straight between his ribs every time they spoke. It was like he relished in frustrating Wilbur, upsetting him for his own amusement. I'm not a foolish child for having a problem with insults directed right at my face, Wilbur snapped, his eyes locking onto Philza's icy ones. The laughter that rang out of Philza's chest at this sparked flames inside of Wilbur, and it took everything in his power not to slap Philza's hand off of his shoulder right then and there. Really? Because I have a feeling you've received your fair share of insults just like that plenty of times before, Vilsa pointed out, still smiling at him. I'd assume you'd be used to it by now. Let comments like that roll right off your back. After all, that's the kind of thick skin you need in politics. At his side, Wilbur curled his fingers into a fist. It's difficult, yes, but I've learned to manage it. Have you, though? Vilsa pushed, raising an eyebrow. Because from what I've seen, a part of you wants pity. You want others to look at you and think, oh, that poor child has been disregarded and berated his entire life. How sad for him. Excuse me, but the other part of you doesn't want that, Vilsa continued, cutting off Wilbur's protest. You want to be viewed as a ruthless politician. You want to sit at the adults' table and play the games the rest of us do, because you're desperate to be taken seriously. But that's never going to happen if you still want people to pity you. I don't want pity! Wilbur hissed, finally pushing Vilsa's hand off his shoulder. Vilsa huffed at this, rolling his eyes as though Wilbur was a child throwing a tantrum that wasn't worth his time. He pushed to his feet and rolled his shoulders out, the feathers behind him rustling with the movement. You're young, but you're not an idiot, Vilsa snapped, his smile gone now. If you don't want pity, then stop acting like a kicked fucking puppy, Orpheus. And with that, Vilsa left the room, the library doors sliding shut behind him. Wait, that's the end of the chapter? What? Are there still only 11 chapters as of late? I keep forgetting that there's a to the top of the chapter button, but oh well. Okay, wait, chapter index. Oh, there's 12 now. Cool. Man. I was not aware that the chapter was over. We're not reading the next one. My throat is shot. I'm just prepping it for the next stream. Okay. And with that, I think that is going to be my stream. Let's see who we can raid. Who is live? Awkward, didn't notice you. This is what you get for lurking No, I'm kidding. I'm sorry, I'm kidding. Let's see. Okay, I know who we can raid. Let's see, it's... Alright. / raid... Bobble is unavailable. What? That... Oh, they spelt it wrong. One second. There we go. Bottle's playing Stardew Valley. So if you want to watch them and go support them, join the raid. Alright, I have work tomorrow, so I probably won't be live.
I most likely stream on, what did I say? Wednesday. Most likely stream on Wednesday. Probably Minecraft. Maybe chapter 10 of this story, because now things are like getting good. Like, I'm not saying that they weren't good before, but like, I liked this chapter, and like I can't wait for the next one. And go support Bones and the Bees, the author of this fic. They also wrote Tommy and Its Clinic for Supervillains. Or no, she also wrote Tommy and Its Clinic for Supervillains. So be sure to support her as well. Alright. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to stay updated on when I'm going to be live, I always tweet when I'm going to be live on my Twitter, so go follow me on Twitter at Claymation with 3 N's. Okay, the raid is about to start soon, so I'm gonna go. Bye!